Everyone ran when the lion appeared. The space emptied in seconds, leaving only dust and breath. One man stayed still as the lion stopped moving. The lion occupied a space built for machines and passage, a place shaped by angles and noise rather than soil. Hard surfaces reflected his presence in dull echoes, making his size feel larger and more out of place. Dust clung to his fur, caught in the folds of his mane where dried blood had stiffened the hair. He stood unevenly, balance guarded, as if one wrong shift would send pain through his frame. Around him, the emptiness left by fleeing men felt recent, charged, as though motion had been torn away and not yet replaced by calm. The air held the sharp smell of iron and fear, lingering without direction. The man noticed the lion at the same instant his body refused to respond. His feet stopped before his thoughts caught up. Muscles tightened, then locked, as if some deeper instinct had seized control and ordered him to remain exactly where he was. He felt the solid ground under his boots, felt the faint vibration of distant movement through the concrete, but none of it mattered. All that existed was the distance between himself and the lion, measured not in steps, but in consequence. He had seen danger before, yet this carried a different weight, one that settled into his chest and slowed his breathing. The lion's breath came in short rises, the ribs working harder than they should. Each inhale looked measured, deliberate, as though the animal was rationing air. His head stayed level, neither lifted in challenge nor dropped in submission. One forepaw hovered just off the ground before touching down again, careful, protective. The movement was small, almost restrained, but it revealed more than any sound could. This was not strength on display. It was endurance under strain. The man waited for the moment when instinct said the lion would surge forward. It never arrived. No roar split the air. No sudden flash of teeth followed. Instead, the lion's gaze drifted past him, then returned, unfocused at first, then sharper, settling on the man without narrowing. The eyes carried exhaustion rather than threat. They tracked movement slowly, as if the world required extra effort to read. The man felt the danger remain present, but altered, tempered by something he could not yet name. Silence grew heavier with each passing second. Even the distant sounds that should have filled the space seemed to retreat. The lion shifted his weight and paused, testing the ground, then stilled again. His tail lay low, motionless, not flicking in warning or irritation. Pain showed not in sound, but in restraint, in the careful way his body refused unnecessary motion. The man sensed that any sudden step from either of them would shatter the fragile balance holding the moment together. Cold crept along the man's arms despite the stale warmth of the place. He felt exposed, visible in a way that stripped him of habit and confidence. His mind ran through every reason to leave, every image of speed and distance that promised safety. Yet something in the lion's posture cut through those urges. This was not a predator choosing prey. This was an animal caught where it did not belong, injured, uncertain, and still standing because stopping entirely was not an option. The man drew a slow breath, then another, careful not to change his outline. His hands remained at his sides, fingers loose but ready. He understood the rules written into the lion's body language, rules older than the structures surrounding them. Stillness mattered. Space mattered. Timing mattered most of all. The lion's ears held neutral, neither pinned nor forward, listening without fixating. It was the posture of an animal waiting, not deciding. For a brief moment, the man wondered how the lion had reached this place. What chain of events had carried him across distance and boundary? The thought passed without forming into questions. Answers were not useful here. Only the present held weight. The lion took another shallow breath and lifted his head slightly, then stopped, as if reconsidering the effort. The movement ended without escalation, leaving the space between them unchanged but charged. The man felt a shift inside himself, subtle but clear. Fear remained, sharp and alive, but it no longer pointed him outward. It anchored him. He understood now that this encounter was not driven by aggression or dominance. It was defined by uncertainty on both sides. The lion did not advance. The man did not retreat. Each seemed to recognize that the first unnecessary action could end the moment badly for both. Time stretched, losing shape. The man became aware of the sound of his own breathing, slow and controlled, matching the lion's measured rhythm without intention. The world narrowed further, stripping away everything except two bodies sharing a space neither had chosen. The lion's gaze held steady, not demanding, not pleading, simply present. In that look, the man saw confusion edged with resolve, an animal refusing to collapse despite injury and fear. The distance between them remained intact, yet the nature of it changed. It no longer felt like a gap waiting to be crossed by force. It felt like a line drawn by mutual caution. The man knew this moment could not last. Something would have to change, either by choice or by consequence. As the lion shifted again and settled, the man felt the weight of that understanding settle with him, preparing him for a decision that could no longer be delayed. The man understood with sudden clarity that remaining where he was could cost him everything. The awareness did not arrive as panic, but as a steady pressure, a calculation formed without words. His body carried years of learned response, all of it insisting on distance, on speed, on leaving before instinct failed. He felt the urge rise through his legs, sharp and demanding, yet he held himself still. The lion lowered his head and kept it there, not bowing, not challenging, simply reducing his height in the space between them. The movement felt deliberate, controlled, and it stopped before becoming anything more. No step followed. The lion remained anchored, mane brushing the ground as his neck relaxed. The long hair dragged lightly across the surface, picking up dust, marking the stillness with quiet contact. The man watched closely, aware that small signals carried weight here. The absence of forward motion mattered more than any display of strength. The lion's body stayed aligned, shoulders squared but not tense, as if waiting for the man to choose rather than forcing the moment open. Fear worked its way into the man's hands, a fine tremor that he could not fully suppress. His fingers curled and uncurled once before settling again at his sides. He focused on breathing, slow and even, letting each breath measure the space separating him from the lion. The distance felt both wide and fragile, held together by restraint on both sides. He counted silently, not numbers but rhythms, letting time stretch without breaking the silence that kept them balanced. The lion's ears remained neutral, angled to catch sound without fixing on any single source. They did not flatten against his head or turn sharply forward. The position spoke of awareness without aggression. The man recognized the meaning without needing to name it. The lion was listening, not preparing. That understanding steadied him more than any promise of safety could have. Time lost its edge. Seconds passed without shape, then minutes, all of it folding inward until the moment felt suspended. The man felt sweat gather along his spine despite the cool air. He made a choice not with his mind, but with his posture. Slowly, carefully, he bent one knee. The movement was controlled, reduced to the smallest arc possible. He stopped halfway, waiting, ready to reverse if the lion reacted. Nothing happened. The lion did not tense or lift his head. He stayed where he was, watching. Encouraged but not reassured, the man lowered himself further until his knee touched the ground. The contact sent a faint vibration through his body, grounding him in place. His balance shifted, weight redistributed, making him smaller without collapsing into vulnerability. The lion's gaze followed the motion, steady and unblinking, but his body did not advance. There was no rush, no sound of warning. The moment accepted the change and held. The man hesitated again, listening to the space between heartbeats. He lowered his second knee with the same care, settling fully without leaning forward. From this position the lion stood taller, broader, yet the difference did not feel threatening. It felt acknowledged. The man raised his hands slowly and placed his palms open and low, fingers spread, resting just above the ground. The gesture was simple, exposed, and intentional. It removed anything that could be mistaken for challenge. The boundary between them thinned without any visible sign. Nothing dramatic marked the shift. It arrived quietly, like a change in air pressure that could only be felt, not seen. The lion's head lifted a fraction, enough to confirm the new position of the man's hands. His eyes remained fixed, not searching now, but reading. He seemed to weigh the stillness, the lowered posture, the absence of threat. The man did not move. He allowed the lion time to decide what the change meant. Risk remained sharp, present in every breath and muscle. The man did not forget what stood before him or what it could do. He simply accepted that retreat was no longer the only path. Trust did not settle fully. It hovered, fragile and conditional. It existed only because neither side pushed it further. The lion stayed where he was, holding his position, neither retreating nor closing the distance. The man stayed kneeling, aware that any shift now would carry consequence. The silence deepened, no longer empty but filled with attention. The man felt the weight of his choice settle into him, steady and irreversible. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed without motion. The lion's breathing eased slightly, still controlled, still shallow but less strained than before. The change was small, easy to miss, yet it marked something new taking shape. The man sensed that the next moments would demand patience rather than courage, endurance rather than speed, and he prepared himself to remain exactly where he was as the space between them began to change in quieter ways. Night gathered with purpose, pressing in as the wind picked up and pulled loose debris across the ground. The man shifted his weight and began to move, not forward in a straight line but angled toward the nearest break in the structure where stone rose to form a shallow cover. Each step was shortened, measured, taken only after a pause. He kept his shoulders low and his movements narrow, aware that the change in light could alter everything. The lion followed at a distance that remained chosen, not forced. His limp showed more clearly now, each careful placement of the injured paw timed to avoid sudden pressure. Despite the pain, his head stayed high enough to watch, ears adjusting with the wind, body ready without being tense. Rain arrived without warning, first as scattered drops and then as a steady curtain that darkened the ground and softened sharp edges. The sound changed immediately, blurring the world into a low, constant rush. Scents thinned and drifted away, carried off before they could settle. The man felt the cold soak through his clothing as he reached the stone and stopped, turning slowly so his outline remained predictable. The lion closed the distance by a small margin, enough to share the cover without crowding it. Water ran along his mane and traced lines through the dust and blood, revealing the raw tear at the paw with brief clarity before washing it again. The man lowered himself to the ground and reached for the edge of his coat. He tore a strip free with deliberate effort, the sound of ripping cloth swallowed by rain. He held the fabric still for a moment, letting the lion register the object and the intent behind it. The lion watched closely, eyes wide but steady, tracking every movement without shifting his stance. When the man extended the cloth slowly toward the injured paw, he stopped short, leaving the final distance unchanged. The offer remained open without demand. Pain tightened the lion's posture as the cloth came closer, yet he did not withdraw. His muscles held firm, tail still, breathing controlled despite the strain. The man waited again, letting time do the work his hands could not rush. When the lion eased his weight just enough to expose the paw, the man moved, wrapping the cloth with careful pressure, never pulling tight, never sudden. Each pass was slow, guided by touch that remained brief and respectful. The lion endured the contact without sound, eyes never leaving the man's hands. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and uneven, marking the passing hours without urgency. The rain continued, cold and steady, turning the stone beneath them slick. The space between man and lion narrowed until it held only warmth from bodies and the rhythm of breath. The man worked by feel as much as sight, checking the binding, adjusting where needed, then pulling his hands back to give the lion room. He stayed alert to every shift in posture, every change in breathing, ready to pause if restraint faltered. Time moved differently beneath the cover of rain and dark. The man's fingers stiffened from cold, yet he kept them steady, flexing slowly when he could without drawing attention. The lion adjusted his position once, settling onto his haunches with care, injured paw lifted slightly to ease pressure. His eyes remained open, alert to the edges of the space, scanning between the man and the open night beyond. Trust held, not as comfort, but as a shared understanding that restraint served them both. Hunger made itself known as a dull ache, present but pushed aside. Cold crept deeper, finding seams and pauses. The man shifted closer to the stone, offering his shoulder as a windbreak without closing the distance too far. The lion accepted the shelter but not the contact, positioning himself so the wind struck his back instead of his face. The choice felt deliberate, a balance between need and caution. Silence filled the remaining space, heavy but functional, carrying more meaning than sound could. Hours passed in this narrow world. The man checked the binding once more, tightening it slightly where the rain had loosened the cloth. The lion's jaw tightened, then relaxed, endurance holding steady. No growl broke the moment. No sudden movement demanded retreat. Both remained alert, aware that the night still carried risks beyond the shelter. Wind shifted, rain eased, then returned, testing patience in cycles. As the dark thinned slightly, the man leaned back against the stone, conserving strength. The lion lifted his head and looked outward, eyes reflecting faint light from the open space beyond. The binding held. The pain, though present, no longer dictated every movement. The man sensed the moment settle into a quieter phase, one that would demand waiting rather than action. He adjusted his position to remain visible and still, preparing himself to hold the silence a while longer as the night began to loosen its grip. Weeks passed with little to mark them except distance. The man moved through open ground where wind cut low and steady, carrying dust that gathered along his boots and creases of his coat. He traveled without urgency, yet nothing about his pace suggested ease. Loss had settled into him in small ways, visible in the way he paused more often and chose paths that avoided obstacles rather than challenged them. The place he walked through felt emptied of purpose, stripped down to shapes and sound, as if whatever once filled it had been pulled away and not replaced. The quiet was complete, not peaceful but bare. No voices followed him, no movement crossed his path. The ground showed signs of passage that ended without explanation, tracks softened by time and wind. He slowed as the land opened wider, eyes lifting to scan the edges where horizon met slope. It was there, at the limit of attention rather than at the center of it, that he noticed the shape standing apart from the terrain. The lion occupied higher ground, positioned where the rise gave him clear sight without forcing proximity. He stood with weight evenly set, no trace of the limp that once shaped every step. His frame looked fuller now, strength returned without excess. The mane rested heavy around his neck, lifted slightly by the breeze, catching light in muted strands rather than shine. He did not step forward or retreat. He simply stood, placed with intent. The man stopped without thought. His body responded before his mind shaped the reason. He remained where he was, feet planted, hands loose at his sides. He did not reach for anything. He did not raise his arms. The distance between them stayed wide, preserved by choice rather than fear. The lion's head remained level, eyes fixed on the man with calm attention. The look carried no demand and no warning. It held recognition without display. Nothing followed the gaze. No sound marked the moment. Wind moved through the space between them, lifting dust that passed and settled again. The man felt the weight of the encounter press in, not as tension, but as clarity. He did not move closer. He did not step away. He allowed the space to exist as it was, unchanged, respected. The lion's posture remained steady, shoulders squared, tail still. He neither tested the boundary nor softened it. Time stretched just long enough to register without turning heavy. The man's breathing stayed even. His eyes did not leave the lion, yet his focus widened to include the ground, the slope, the open air. He understood the importance of stillness here, not as submission, but as acknowledgement. The lion held the higher ground without asserting it, choosing position over motion. The choice felt deliberate, shaped by memory rather than instinct alone. Recognition passed between them without proof or signal. No sound confirmed it. No gesture sealed it. It existed in the way neither moved to change the distance. The man did not nod or lift his chin. The lion did not flick his tail or shift his weight. The moment remained clean, untouched by excess. It carried no need for extension. The lion turned first, not abruptly, but with controlled ease. His body rotated as one piece, muscles working smoothly beneath the skin. He angled away from the man and began to move along the ridge, steps unhurried, confident without display. The mane shifted with each stride, catching the light once more before falling back into place. He did not look back. The man remained where he was until the lion passed beyond the line of sight. Only then did he let his shoulders ease slightly, the tension releasing without sound. The ground returned to stillness, the wind carrying on as before. Nothing marked the place where the lion had stood except the memory of it. The man turned and continued on his path, steps steady, carrying the encounter with him in quiet permanence.